Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Soul Podcasting Podcast. I have with me today another guest, and I'm excited to talk with him because he has a lot to share about podcasting, knows a lot about this. And so this is Chris Jordan. He is a podcast strategist and brand growth expert who spent the last 5 years behind the mic with some notable names in personal development. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here and excited to be of service to the audience.
Yes, I love having you here because I've got a lot of questions for you, and I can't wait to hear what your answers are because we're going to grow so much from this conversation. And so you have worked with some of the most powerful brands. And so I want you to share like how you got into podcasting. Just kind of give us your mini journey into podcasting, into the space, and then some of the people that you worked with behind the scenes. And then we'll just ask you some questions about like what's made things pop for you in podcasting. But first, how did you get into it?
Perfect. Yeah. So what's interesting is the way that I ended up finding myself being a, professional podcast producer, strategist, and now growth coach actually started because of podcasting, and I didn't know in the beginning. And so it really became full circle. When I put two and two together, I was like, whoa, this is actually crazy. But when I was growing up, sort of as I was headed out of high school and into the real world, I knew that I was really fascinated by sort of business thought leaders. Gary Vaynerchuk was like the core. I just like consumed everything, loved everything,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to work for him. And one of the ways I figured, I was like, well, how do I get an in? And so I wanted to become friends with people that worked for his team. I thought that that would be a strategic move. And so what I did is I invited one of those people onto a podcast of mine, episode one of a show. This would have been like 8 years ago now,
Wow.
and invited him on, interviewed him about his role, about his life, about his creative process, all of this stuff, and put it out to the world. And that actually led to him trying to get me a job with Gary Vaynerchuk at the time. But
Wow.
what it also did is when I put it out to the world and he shared it with his audience, it connected me with more and more people that I hadn't known. And
Wow.
one of those people a couple years later said, "Hey man, I am editing for this podcast. It's called The School of Greatness with a host named Lewis Howes. We need more people to work on this podcast. Are you available? I saw your podcast interview with that guy like more than a year ago." And I was like, well, yeah, absolutely. I would love to, see about, working on this show called The School of Greatness. And that time I was just like a podcast editor. And so, yeah, really, it was a full circle journey that through starting a podcast with not really any knowledge that I would work professionally in the world of it,
Hmm.
did end up leading to the job. And I really give the credit to, putting myself out there, starting a podcast,
Yeah.
building the relationships through the podcast. So what's interesting is like that one decision has changed my entire like the trajectory of my life.
Wow.
And it's an interview that has a couple hundred views. I think I did one other episode of that podcast at the time, and then I was off to the world, and I paused on it. But it just took that one podcast conversation to
Yeah.
really start everything. And so now, it's now I can teach that, which is awesome.
I love that because the thing I'm hearing is that one decision with podcasting, one decision to get out there and to either support with editing or to just be the face of someone's show, like maybe be an interview guest, it makes a huge difference. And we never know who's going to see that interview, who's going to hear it and say, hey, I want you to do something with me, work on a project with me. And one opportunity leads to another. So I always like to tell people on the show, like that is one of the benefits of podcasting is that you never know where it's going to take you. It's exciting. It's an exciting journey. So that said, I know you've learned maybe a couple of lessons along the way with podcasting. And so I like talking about branding on the show as well because podcasting and branding, they really go hand in hand. So, what makes a podcast a brand in your opinion? Like you've worked with some really top brands. So, what makes it truly impactful for a brand?
Yeah, so I think that It's interesting because, yeah, a podcast is typically one component of someone's brand, but it can be the main driver for someone's brand. And so, in my experience, those have been a lot of the people I've worked with where their podcasts became, what all of their social media content was around, and it was their core business model. I think
Yeah.
the where there's a disconnect is sometimes someone's podcast sometimes isn't fully related with what their brand is or what their business is. And so to
Right.
me, I think what makes a really strong brand and podcast is when there's synergy of here is who I am, here is who I am ready to serve, and my podcast is an extension of that, where we go deep on all of these
Mm,
topics. We go deep on the ways
right.
that I, service my clients and coach people and help people, which is, at the core, it's very simple, but a lot of people overcomplicate it, and a lot of people don't do as good of a job as they could. And
Hmm.
so, really, like one of the biggest things I ask people is like, who are you? Who do you want to serve?
Right.
And like that needs to be as clear as possible,
Yeah.
or you're going to miss the mark. So as a starting line, like that to me is what makes or breaks a brand, which then will make or break the podcast that is an extension of it.
I think that's so true that just knowing your why, knowing what are you doing in the first place? Who are you trying to reach? What is the mission of your show? And then like you said, making sure that aligns with your brand so it's not content that isn't integrated somehow with your current brand. It needs to somehow be connected. So it makes sense. So then, okay, so there are a lot of us here are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, and we want to use podcasting as a platform to speak. But like you just said, it can be a great business tool. And so, how do we use podcasting not just as a place to come and share our thoughts or ideas, but really to integrate that into our business plan and to convert our listeners to potential customers down the road, right? Clients or customers. How does that work exactly?
That's a great question. So, the best way for solopreneurs to grow their business through podcasting is to make sure, again, that their podcast is very clear on how they're servicing people in the business that they have.
Yeah.
If you run a marketing agency and you have a comedy show, you're most likely not going to get leads from that for your marketing agency, right? And that can be expected, and that's okay. I would love more comedy shows from marketing agency leaders, right? Not what I'm saying, but what I am saying is, if you run a marketing agency, you should have a show where you talk about marketing and you talk about how you help people and what you can do for people. I'll tell you a really big issue that a lot of people can solve for is, so say if you have a marketing agency as an example on your podcast, a lot of people make the mistake of they would bring in other people that have other marketing agencies or do things that are very similar to them, and that's all their podcast feed is.
Wow.
Where instead what I would advise is, and I'm pushing a lot of people on this, is the power of solo-led content.
Right.
So like I'm grateful that you are letting me come on your show and we're
Yeah.
getting to meet and connect, and it's amazing, but I also would love to know that you're doing solo-led
Yeah.
content pretty often as well, because a mistake that we make with podcasting sometimes is when it's only focused on guests 100% of the time, but we want to use it as lead generation for our business,
Mm,
we're missing out on the audience spending enough time with you solo, where they're
right.
learning about your expertise.
Right.
And when you do only guest interviews, you're giving the spotlight to the guest, right? Which
Yes.
is amazing, and I'm grateful for it here. And now we're building this relationship, and like I now literally we've known each other for less than 30 minutes
Right.
technically. It's like I want to help you now because
Yeah.
I'm grateful you've given me this opportunity, and so it's great in that way,
Hmm.
but the missing link is audience listening, for anyone out there who has a podcast that's not doing solo-led content as well on their feed. You're missing the chance for your audience to go deeper on a subject with you,
Yeah.
and then you make strong call to actions to
Yes.
then maybe it's, book a, discovery call with you or whatever it is you want to drive them to.
Hmm.
That's really like a big misunderstanding that a lot of people have. Another way, does that make sense?
That is perfect. Yes, absolutely. And I so totally agree with you.
So
Yeah.
the other thing though, for people who maybe they're not super comfortable with solo-led formats yet, and they
Hmm.
love talking to people. It's taking a look at, okay, well, who are you having on your show?
Hmm.
Because I spoke to somebody today where we went through this exact problem where they were like, I know so many great people. They have so many great stories. I just have been bringing them on my podcast, but I'm not really getting much business from my
Mm.
show. And I told them, I was like, you need to be as strategic as possible about who you bring on your show. And there's kind of
Yeah.
two ways that you can be strategic about who you bring on. So the first one is bringing on people that maybe they have something really valuable to share and it'll be great to, give value to your audience, but you also
Hmm.
know they're a potential client of yours. They're kind of your ideal, client profile of a
Right.
person, right? Because if they are, and you guys get to come on, you get to have this whole hour conversation, it's really powerful,
Yeah.
they're gonna walk away and like want to work with you. If you
Yeah.
end up
Yeah.
having that as you have like a core offer that makes sense for them, like they've now spent an hour with you, you've given them
Yeah.
value, you've given them like a platform to share their message. Now they're gonna want to, how do I help you? Oh, you have this offer that would help me. Well, now I know you. We're
Yeah.
kind of friends. Like, yeah, let's do this. There are podcasters who build seven-figure businesses off of that as a strategy.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
other, yeah, which is incredible. Like that's amazing. And it makes sense when you think about it, but at the same time, it's very easy to get caught up in, I know these amazing people, I want them on my show, but there's not like a strategic, they're not going to be your ideal customer, or they're not, and this is the other option of being more strategic, is people that you could potentially partner with. And so
Mm.
as an example for me on my podcast, I just revamped my show, and so you'll be able to see this in the future. But in the past, I brought on a handful of people that, actually like they would be good guests for your show. So this kind of all makes sense, right? Like for you and
Hmm.
I, like now we know each other, and there will
Hmm.
be chances where I get to learn what you do, you get to learn what I do, and we can help each other, because now we're
Hmm.
friends and we
Hmm.
want to help each other
Right.
win, right? And so in this case, like maybe I'm not your ideal client that you're typically signing with, but I might know people, and now like obviously
Hmm.
we run in similar spaces, we talk about podcasting, so you and I, we can be, like joint
Right.
venture partners is kind of,
Right.
how I
Right.
think about it. And so
Yeah.
I think anyone listening, if they think about who they've had as guests on their show and they look at the strategy, if they don't fit into those two buckets, it's
Mm.
fine if they don't fit in those two buckets,
Hmm.
unless your goal is, hey, I want to grow my business with my podcast, and none of my guests fit into those two buckets. That is where the disconnect is. And that is where I find 99% of podcasters I talk to are in that area where they're like, yeah, I'm just giving away all my, attention to guests that they're great people. They have great stories. I'm not saying there's no
Right.
power in doing that, but
Right.
if our goal is to grow your business, you only have so much time.
Yes.
You only have so much bandwidth. And so how can we be as strategic as possible from a guesting perspective as
Yeah.
well? And so if you do that guesting strategy and the solo-led
Uh-huh.
strategy,
Uh-huh.
magic.
Perfect combination. Perfect combo. I love that. And I'm hearing this, what I'm hearing mostly right now is it's important to think like a marketer in podcasting, as well as all the other things that come along with being a business owner. That is a big part of marketing, or a big part of podcasting is marketing. And to think strategically, like you said, like partnerships and networking, and it's thinking on terms of client versus like what kind of connection. So the just like the whole cross pollination of like how can I make sure that what I'm doing is working on both ends of the spectrum, that I'm kind of getting a two for one here. I'm helping my audience, but I'm also growing my business. So thinking like a marketer, super smart, super smart. And that's probably when you've worked with the brands that you've worked with, that's probably how they grew so quickly. And so It's a good thing to know and to consider each time we're creating content, that it's not just going out into the void, that there's a purpose, there's a strategy behind it. So thank you for like just clarifying that and helping us to like think along those lines because that's what we need. Also, like when you talked about the different formats, you talked about the format of guesting versus hosting a solo podcast. So that's something that I do a lot is I've done mostly solo podcasts on this show. My one of my other shows I do a lot of interviewing, but this one has been solo up until episode like 46. So, and that was the reason is I wanted to make that sort of like heart to heart connection with my listeners before I jumped into presenting people on the show as guests. But there are some people that are more, inclined to want to do solo shows only, and others that want to do interviews mostly. So, how can they best decide, like, what's the best format for them? Any suggestions?
It's a great question. I like to use the phrase commit to what you can commit to when it comes
Hmm.
to the type of content that you want to create. And so whether that is solo led or that is interviewing people or a mix of both, it needs to be what you are committed to showing up for and doing week over week for a very long period of time. And I think a mistake that a lot of podcasters make is they will look at top podcasts and there's, millions of examples to look at,
Yeah.
and they will say, well, this is what all of these people are doing, so I must do that. Which is why I
Hmm.
think there are a ton of interview shows where I'll talk to the host that they end up saying, I don't actually know why I'm doing all these interviews, but they just started it because they saw, Joe Rogan or Caller Daddy or all these like huge
Yeah.
interview shows, and they're like, okay, that's what it means to have a podcast. And it could mean
Right.
that. But if you actually feel really excited to share your solo thoughts and just talk one to one with your audience, lean into that format because there's plenty of other examples where that is the core format of a podcast. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
really it comes down to what feels best to you and what do you want to commit to? Because when you get
Yeah.
clear on that, then you're off to the races. But usually it's
Yeah.
very confusing for people because they will just look at what works for other people and apply it to them. But you're not the same person. Your situation's different, your bandwidth is different. The
Yeah.
way you want to tell stories and teach is different than the examples you're looking at. And so that's a
Yeah.
mistake is like, what works for them, let me do it. Instead of saying, well, what worked for other people and how can
Hmm.
I borrow some of that and apply it to, the
Yeah.
formats that I actually want to do.
Right. That's good. That's good. Do what works for you. Do what works for you. What feels aligned for you. And then, so my question for you is then which format is best for you? How do you feel most comfortable when you're podcasting?
Yeah, so I love conversations, but
Hmm.
my business that I'm focused on and wanting to grow, right, is me being a podcast growth coach. And so I know
Hmm.
because of that, I need to do solo-led content. Sometimes it takes
Yeah.
me a little bit longer, I'll overthink it. Luckily, I've kind of been making videos and been behind the mic since I was like 10 years old. So it comes more naturally to me than other people at this point. But I love both formats. And so like the win-win
Yeah.
for me actually is I will sometimes bring guests onto my show. I have a show called The Podcast Game that is around podcasting. But because I know
Hmm.
I love conversations and I have that as a skill set, I've prepped hundreds of interviews for very notable people. I have a second show that I'll be launching that is just around interviews for people, but
Wow.
it won't mess up my feed with solo stuff that's around
Right.
podcasting. So,
Okay.
I'm
So
like
you
I'm
do
kind of
both.
yeah, like the focus
Yeah.
is to do both, but with, strategy and intentionality to it. So,
Right.
because my goal is to grow my business, I know I need to do a show about podcasting that's mostly solo led, bringing on some occasional
Yeah.
experts that are adjacent and make sense. But what I also know is I love to talk to people and interview people. So I have another podcast where honestly, the strategy is these are amazing people with amazing things to share. They're
Hmm.
also my ideal clients. And so my hope is to give
Mm.
tons of value to them, but also hopefully be able to work with some of them, not in like a
Right.
because I'm literally not a salesy person at all, which is funny. I'm like trying to help people grow their businesses, but like I don't like salesy. Like I like connection. And then if it makes sense to work
Yeah.
together, let's freaking do it. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's where I shared strategies for people. That's how I'm currently running both. And I'm very in the early
Okay.
stages of it.
Hmm.
What's difficult with some people of like the businesses that we run, you get too caught up in doing the thing that we forget to like create around the thing. And so now I'm
Right.
like, taking my own advice and finally, doing both of these at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's a strategy that when I've used it in the past, it has worked. It's worked for other clients of mine. And so
Yeah.
that's how I'm kind of going about it.
Awesome. Awesome. So you're putting into practice everything that you preach, and it's like being in the kind of the crux of what you're doing is showing you how to do, like you're understanding how to be on both ends of it. So that you're growing. You said two podcasts right now?
Yeah, and
So
again,
one,
they're early stages. Like
yeah.
the podcast game is around. The other one will be called Noteworthy, and it's not even live
Oh.
yet.
Oh, okay. So it may be live by the time we
Yeah, yeah,
publish.
yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And I always love talking to podcasters that are doing more than one show. That's like a whole different mindset. And so I'm kind of in that trench right now as well. And yeah, it's a lot to manage, but it actually helps you to become more strategic because when you have more than one show, you have a goal for each show and you're
Mhm,
very specific about why you're doing that show. So I think it
mhm.
helps sometimes to have more than one just so that you're like really clear like who are your audiences, who are you trying to reach, why are you trying to reach them. And I love what you're saying about just like factoring in those ideas of like how am I going to reach this specific audience and then maybe create a brand new clientele from this audience. And so that's a different way of looking at podcasting. And I think a lot of people don't even consider that at all. They just show up on the mic and record their show and publish it and that's it and on to the next show. But to think
Mhm.
of it as a strategy, like this is a way also to grow your business. I think that is excellent. It's good to remember that. So thank you for like showing us that we can do that. And then just I guess my last kind of big question for you is there anything that you used to believe about podcasting that maybe you no longer believe or you changed your mind about? Just kind of what can you think of that is different today than what you thought about podcasting years ago?
That's a great question. I do think the biggest thing that I have been able to understand does go back to you know, don't just look at the one example and say, well, this person, I love them, they do this format, I need to do it, because there are examples of every type of format being successful and, in its own regard. And so, it's kind of like if you look for examples of something doing well, you'll find them. And I feel
Yeah.
that is very freeing. So it doesn't lock up, some of us in a box that we don't want to be in.
Hmm.
I think, one interesting thing that is happening right now in podcasting. So I almost feel like my belief is shifting, changing. I'm trying to figure out like really how to talk through it. I'd be curious of your thoughts. Is obviously there's been a very big push for video
Yeah.
podcasting in the
Yeah.
last 2 years, and it's only getting bigger.
Yep.
I think that video podcasts are amazing for discovery, but when it comes to really loving a show and connecting with it, it is ones that you can listen to on the
I
go or
agree.
while you're doing something and
Yeah.
it's in your ears,
Yeah.
audio only.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel really guilty that, there are podcasts that spend a lot of money on their studios and all of it. And it is amazing for discovery and for social clips and all of that. But at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I end up consuming it on just audio only while I'm on my walk or something. But
I have to agree with you.
those are the shows and those are the hosts that I've been buying things from, or I want to go see them when they're on tour, or I want to
Mhm.
hire them for coaching, depending on the type of show that it is.
Yeah.
And so I think some people right now in the middle of this feel discouraged if they're not going all in on video.
Yeah.
But I think video is amazing for discovery because discovery on the audio only platforms is pretty hard.
Yeah.
It's a you got to kind of pound the pavement and get people to listen one at a time.
Yeah,
Whereas on, YouTube, you can put a video out, and if you do some titling and some thumbnail strategy, you can reach a lot more people. But
true.
my goal is, YouTube is for discovery, but you want to get them over to your audio feed,
Yeah,
because if they listen there, you've got them.
you've got them.
Most likely.
Absolutely.
That like
Yeah.
that is the focus, because YouTube is great for discoverability, but as fast as I'm able to find a new show and click on it, I can click off of it just
Yeah.
as easily because I'm on YouTube. Whereas on audio, if I click on an episode, I'm probably driving or something, and I'm gonna try to give it like
Yes.
a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And so that to me is this, yeah, it's this interesting belief because video is really important, but some people are like, audio only is not even worth it. It's dead, all this, and I'm like, I don't think
Yeah.
that's
I
really
don't,
true
no, I don't
whatsoever.
agree with that at all either. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying that I think YouTube, because SEO and Google, all of that, we need to be there. We need to have a presence there. And I feel like it's really important to have our podcasts on YouTube. But I also feel like it's equally, maybe even more so important to keep it audio and to focus a lot of our energy on that because I mean, when I'm listening to a podcast, I'm honestly not looking at a screen.
Yep.
I'm out and about somewhere. I was gardening the other day, working on my yard and just like listening to a podcast. And then I later on went to find her on YouTube so I could see what she was talking about. She was showing something
Mhm.
on a video. But for me, I'm like, I'm going back to that audio to listen. And I look at the show notes for links if I need to figure out how to get something. And she's like my personal coach. She doesn't even know me, but I'm like her client and she doesn't even know. So that's how I feel like audio is, it gives you that personal one-on-one mentoring type relationship with your audience. Whereas with a video, it's so useful, like you said, social clips, discoverability, but that one-on-one, that feeling of connection is just not the same, I think, with a video. So
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with you. I agree
It's
with
an
you.
interesting. We'll see how it plays out, but I know some
I
people
know.
listening might not be on video yet. They feel really discouraged about like the
Yeah.
future of it. I think there's still always going to be power in like your core people listening to you while
Yeah.
they're driving or they're doing dishes or working
Exactly.
out or something like that.
Yeah.
So I just think that that's a, I don't know, I'm in the midst of
Yeah.
that belief and figuring out where we're gonna, sit with it. So
Yeah. We'll see
that
what
would be my
happens in a
opinion.
couple of years. We'll see. But like you said, I wouldn't want anyone to feel discouraged about starting a show because they're feeling like, well, YouTube is such a barrier to entry. Or, it's just so much easier to create audio. And if that's easier, by all means, like start with audio. Start with that. Because that's what podcasting essentially was to begin with anyway. So
Right.
yeah. Yeah. But I love this and we've had a great conversation. Really enjoyed talking about podcasting with you, and you've been really encouraging to us. So I would love to know how our listeners can reach you and find out more about what you do, and also to listen to your podcast.
Yeah, so my podcast is called The Podcast Game, so easily searchable. And the best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, anything like that, feel free to send me a message. I'm more than happy to be of service and to support. And so thank you so much for having me on and listening to me, and I hope it was valuable.
It certainly was. Thank you so much, Chris, for being on the show.